Hello everyone, and welcome to my first video. In this video I'm going to show you some tips. Specifically, I'm going to show you how to use volume of items as automation. And this technique can be extremely useful for many use cases. Uh, for example, people use this in music a lot to duck their reverb underneath, for example, a vocal, so that the vocal is a lot clearer. But you can also use this in sound design, and that's what I want to talk about a lot today. Because I think there's a lot of missed potential if you don't ever use this. And by the end of this video, I hope that you understand this technique and that you can apply it yourself. And mostly, I hope that it's a new tool in your sort of creative toolbox, because this is something you can use on many different, in many different ways, and it adds a lot of naturality to your sound. Basically, makes it sound more natural. So this is great to do creative effects in Magic or to layer more sounds. First, I'm just going to show you a very simple example of how this, what is this, what this is doing. And this is not a sound design example. This is how you usually do it in music. So we have this vocal, and I'm going to remove the effect for a second.
I've been looking for something that would give me peace of mind.
And we're going to add a reverb to this vocal. And what you're going to see is this effects mix knob moving, and right now this is on 37, and that's actually like quite a lot for vocals.
I've been looking for something that would give me peace of mind.
But as you can see, this gets ducked whenever the vocal is actually going on, and this makes it a lot more natural. Let's hear it when if this was not going on.
I've been looking for something that would give me peace of mind.
In some cases this can work, but in this case it would sound like too wet. You might only want to do this if you want the sound to be really far away, but you can use this audio control signal to control that. I'll show you how to do this in a second. I just want to show you some examples of what you can do with it first.
I've been looking for something that would give me peace of mind.
As you can see, this modulation is basically listening to the volume and then changing this sort of green value to change the actual wet knob.
I've been looking for
So let's do this ourselves, but let's do it in some sound design. So I've prepared a footstep track for you. This is just some footsteps I found from Soundly. And let's imagine a situation where this is a footstep with dirt, but we need more falling dirt. For example, when the footstep moves up, sometimes there's more crunch and makes it sound, or like maybe your mic is more to the floor, and so you hear more of those details. But the footsteps you have is these, and they're missing that crunch. What you could do in this, for example, is get a dirt layer, but the problem is you'd have to automate this. So I'll show you how to, like, what you could do in theory is you do this, get to 0 volume, and you have to like manually, for every footstep, make a little automation. And of course this can work, and you have a lot of fine grain control. As you can see, it sounds fine. Let's up the volume so you can hear it. So this adds what we were looking for, but imagine having to do this for your whole track and like having to do every footstep, and then later maybe suddenly you want less dirt in one spot, and then you have to suddenly start automating each of those individual peaks, and it's gonna be really time consuming. So we can instead use the technique I just showed you on the vocal to do the exact same thing, but much more, well, much faster, and in my opinion, cleaner and nicer sounding. So what we want to do is we want to get the steps, we want to route them, we want to send them to the dirt layer. Just like you would, for example, if you're going to have a sand bus for reverb. But instead of going to channel 1 and 2, we're going to send it to either just channel 3 or 4 or 3 and 4, doesn't really matter. But I'm just choosing 3 because it's cleaner. We want to send it to channel 3, and then we want to get something with a volume knob. You could get like a little plugin that is just a volume, or like make a little script that's just a volume knob, but since not everyone may have this, let's just use RiaComp, a default plugin, and then automate the wet knob, which is just going to act as our volume. Also, I forgot to delete the envelope, so we don't hear anything at the moment. And it's still actually doing its thing. We don't want any volume. So there we go. We have our volume of our dirt. This is just a volume knob. Now let's, after tweaking this parameter, you want to go to parameter modulation MIDI link, and then tick this box, audio control signal sidechain. And then instead of choosing 1 and 2, like you would do for the vocal if you want to modulate the thingy by the parameter by itself, you choose the track that your audio is being sent to. So if you remember, we sent our steps to channel 3, and so we choose number 3 here. And now when the steps are going on, actually we're not going to see much. We want to put this to extreme values. That's usually how I work with this. So we completely reduce our attack and release and keep the strength at 100, minimum volume to -60, and maximum to full. And now we see this green thing moving, and immediately we hear that there's dirt, there's more crunch. So this is already kind of doing what we would want, but now we're going to tweak this so that we get a nicer sound. First thing, we might want to have a bit more release, so that there's more dirt like falling afterwards, and a little bit more attack so it's less snappy. This basically just smooths out the sound. The attack makes a little bit more fade in so that it doesn't instantly go to the maximum value, and the release makes it fade out a bit more, so the sound stays a bit after the actual footstep plays. Now this is quite intense still, like now we have a lot of dirt all of a sudden, especially if we want like a long dirt afterwards. Let's do a little bit short. We can tweak this strength knob, but in this case our strength knob is just tweaking the maximum volume. So instead of using this knob, I usually end up using the actual volume over here. And now we can even decide exactly where we want dirt. So let's say we want, in the video here, there's a dirt path, like an extra dirt path. And here there's not, then you would go like this, add some dirt and dirt moment here. And here there's less dirt. So this is a nice technique to add some variation in your sound, especially on different surfaces. But maybe you're already starting to think like, well, I can do this with many other things. For example, maybe we want this footstep to be more impactful. We want it to have more of an oomph to it when we are walking around. We can do the same technique with some rumble. Instead of getting a plugin that adds rumble for you, we can manually make a rumbler and like really change how that rumble sounds manually. This is already a bit more advanced, but it's exactly the same process. So we don't always need to just adjust volume. We can also adjust things like pitch, or we can send this to the modulator of our synth. So I've prepared this rumble machine for us. I'm just going to solo it so you can see what it does. So it's kind of a simple machine. Basically, the higher this knob, the more rumble. Now we're going to use this, we're going to modulate this. So let's first send to our rumble bus. We're going to do the same thing, we're sending to channel 3. Can also be channel 4, but doesn't matter. And then we adjust our rumble value. And we go parameter modulation / MIDI link. And audio control signal sidechain. and we choose channel 3. And then again, we go to extreme values so we can find something nice. There we go. We have a rumble layer. And now with the footsteps. And as you can see, we've already added a lot more oomph to the sound. And now the nice thing is, since this is a synth, we can tweak this. Could be like, maybe we want even more pitch. Like I've sent this rumble to the remap, which means basically how the more of this value is, it follows this curve, and then we can send this to somewhere. Send this to the pitch. We want more pitch to give even more oomph. It might be too extreme, or maybe you want to adjust the volume. So that's a nice thing about using this technique and a synthesizer, or even just a normal pitch. We can also like this didn't need to be what's it called, a synthesizer. You could also just get a normal rumble track and then get a pitch modulator like rea pitch, and then modulate this. So for example, show track parameter modulation MIDI link, and now audio control signal sidechain. As you can see, we adjust this value. This would be like our minimum, and then we would choose number 3 again because we've already routed to rumble. Go to minimum and maximum, and now as you can see, this is modulating the pitch, and that can add a lot more movement to the sound. In this case, it's not going to sound good because we're already doing that, so it becomes too extreme. I'm going to remove this modulation. But yeah, that's the idea of the technique, and I hope you can imagine that you can do a lot of different things with this. You could put this on a phaser, on the volume of a phaser, for example, and that's going to completely change how natural your phaser sounds, because normally if you put a phaser on something, you always hear the phaser, it's always going on, but now it would only be in the most extreme parts of the sound. It makes it much more much more natural, and makes it much nicer sounding, in my opinion. So I use this technique a lot. I really encourage you to go and experiment with this, because you could use this for layering, but you can also use this for effects. You could use this for mixing. For example, if sound A has a lot of low end and sound B has a lot of low end, you could duck sound sound B's low end under the volume of sound A. Maybe I show you that just as a last sort of repetition of the technique. But if you've already got it and you're like, oh, I understand, that's also awesome, of course. So let's get sound A, maybe kick and bass. That's like common in music, of course, that you have kick with a lot of sub and bass with a lot of sub. But in this case, maybe our bass is like earthquake rumble, and our kick is an impact, like that's maybe a bit much, but impact. Actually, that's a good thing that it's a lot. So let's see. Now we have two things with a lot of low end. And in this case, it's still fine. But the overall peak is going to be a lot higher than it would be, because low frequency waves, of course, are a lot bigger than small frequency waves. And so you end up clipping much sooner. Let's say this sound was a lot louder. This one was almost clipping already. And then this one is also almost clipping. Then, as you can see, the individual tracks don't clip, but the final track is clipping. And instead of like fully ducking the whole sound, in this case, I mean, most of this is rumble, and instead of doing the whole sound, we could take sound A and route it to sound B. I'm gonna rename this to rumble and impact. And then we just use the same technique, but instead we're going to use an EQ because I just want to show that you can put this on everything. And we're going to low shelf. We're going to move the up and down movement of this thing. I want a bit more Q so it's more pronounced. Then move this basically. So by default this is not doing anything. And then we move this parameter. And we go parameter modulation MIDI link again, audio control signal again. Oh, and I forgot to route to channel 3. Don't forget to do that. And there we go. And now we're going to duck the rumble under the impact. So extreme values again, but this time negative, because we want to be moving down. This is a bit extreme. I think we need a little less release. And then here we have something minimum and maximum value. Maybe we actually want this to only happen during the impact of the sound and not during the tail. And so our sound is only loudest at this part. So we should adjust the minimum value so that this is less pronounced, and then we can also see how much it's talking. It's going to like -60, that's like a lot. So let's reduce the strength. And now we're still clipping actually, so we need a little bit more. And there we go. We're no longer clipping. Now we are clipping again. Of course, you can still fix this with a compressor because the amount of clipping is now, in any case, a lot reduced. If you make it more pronounced, then we don't clip anymore. But then the disadvantage, in my opinion, is that there's also really a noticeable reduction in this part of the sound. So I want to bump this up a little. Maybe reduce the strength, or increase the strength, sorry. Just change the minimum volume so it doesn't duck there. Something like this. Also, let's add on top of this again, because sometimes, for example, right now we're not getting what we want because I think the tail, for example, is impacting the sound of the rumble too much, which we don't want. And so you could stack things on top of each other here. This is getting a bit into really advanced territory. But we can apply an effect to only the input, the incoming channel 3. So let's add a transient shaper, for example. The kilohertz transient shaper in this case, before the EQ, because we want this to happen on channel 3 before it modulates. And we're going to remove all of our other channels. This is basically saying which sounds are coming in and which are coming out. So channel 3 is going into the left and right input, and the left and right input are coming out of channel 3. This will make sense if you do it a few times and we experiment with it. And then now we're basically only modulating the attack and sustain of channel 3. It doesn't change the original sound, but it changes the modulator. We add more of a transient to it, and we reduce that sustain so that it doesn't keep ducking our sound. And now we can see this is much more what we wanted. It really immediately ducks it. No clipping at all. and it sounds like it's still rumbling because this impact one is the one rumbling. Actually makes it more pronounced. Let's remove those sounds so we can hear the difference. Actually makes that impact less impactful, even though the full volume is coming through. This is just a little mixing technique. If you do this a few times, you'll get used to it and it will go a lot faster. Lastly, I also wanted to show how you can bake this into automation. Sometimes, for example, you might want to change your sound later or not always rely on the incoming volume, but instead just want to bake what you're modulating. If you're going to do that, just put your record. Well, first of all, you need the track. So in this case, we were modulating this one. We need to show track envelope. If you ever want to do this with a track envelope, in any case, you can also just open modulation here. But I prefer not to do this because then your automation lane is also influencing the sound. It can be a bit confusing sometimes if you do it like that, so I didn't show it. But now it's set up correctly. In any case, we are at 0 dB in the beginning, and then we're going to record this one, and we want to put the record mode to right. The other modes like latching doesn't work because this is a modulator, so we need to just get all movement regardless of what's happening. And then we can record it by just playing. Now you see the automation being recorded. This is really nice. Now of course we want to turn it off, put it back to trim. Now we can change this into automation items and change how much of that modulation is going on at each point, or make those minuscule changes again. Sometimes, in very rare cases, you don't have enough detail in your automation. Sometimes you want maybe like every minuscule movement in the sound to be recorded. If that's the case, first of all, of course, change your parameter to be modulating with 0 attack and 0 release, so it really picks up all the movements. Nothing to do with attacks and release. Of course, we want to, in this case, clear our automation. Actually, let's not clear the automation, let's just record after this. Put it on right. This one has some nice fast movement. Let's record this one. Now you can see that it kind of picks it up. It kind of picks up that movement of that first impact, but there's not enough fast movements. If you need that, if you need all of those little details, you have to increase your buffer rate. So right now mine is already a little bit high, or at least without ASIO it's high. You can reduce this even more, and then your latency is the amount of updates per, well, the amount of time per update. I think 10 milliseconds would be enough. That's almost enough for everything. It's going to be really clicky, that's completely okay. That's just because your CPU now has too much work, and so you're getting buffer underruns, but it's going to show up with a lot more detail in the automation. So now we're really getting all of those little peaks. You go, accidentally. Yeah, hold on, let me re-record that. This really gets all the detail in the sound. You can immediately see that there's more of a peak there and more movement in between. Of course, this like really small movement becomes a lot, but you get the idea. Sometimes you have some sound that moves too fast and you want to do this. And then afterwards you put it back, of course, you don't have any clicks. There you go. And then don't forget to put it back to trim. So yeah, that's this technique. I hope this showed you a new tool to use, and I encourage you to start experimenting with it. Have a nice day.